Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Let's start reading from where we left last week. A man, if he stands alone in the world, cannot possess refining experience. And when he cannot possess refining experience, he cannot serve the evolution of spirit. Thus, at that point, the imperative of the various communal evolutionary plans in the matter universe shows itself openly. Therefore, bodily beings need to be in reciprocal interchange with other bodies and matter that exist outside of the body. Out of these relations with them innumerable event combinations occur. Thus, comprehensions pertaining to these event combinations, which are reflected from essence being to spirit, allow the evolution of being at this stage. So, spirit participates with matter. It builds the conscious matter, that is, the being. And the being, with the activities of its own spirit and of helping beings, builds as well a body out of crude matter. And it influences matter through this body. And by influencing other bodies other than itself with the crude matter it uses, it steps into the communal plan. And its evolution at the stage of being of the hydrogen cosmos starts to progress from this moment on. To ensure that no point of this important knowledge remains vague, we will provide some explanations. For example, for the evolution of a very backward man who is destitute of love and conscience, he must encounter opposite values in accordance with the duality principle and the value differentiation mechanism. He must face concepts like love, hate, justice, atrocity, goodness, evil, and by this means, he must automatically acquire some knowledge of comparison and restore his equilibrium. Because of this, it is necessary for him to be in relations with other bodies. A man, with a whip in his hand, lashes a piece of rock again and again. What result can he get from this? None at all. The results he might get from lashing this piece of rock cannot provide any opposite values that would determine his capabilities for love and conscience. He, when he cannot find a body against him, cannot start to perform atrocities and cruelties around him, and when he cannot do this, he cannot acquire opposite values which will spawn the necessary events in accordance with the duality principle and value differentiation mechanism, and as a result of this, he cannot reach the matter developments he needs, cannot evolve. On the contrary, if that man whips a child, things change. Various reactions of that child or of others around him as a consequence of this whipping will stand up before him as opposite elements and immediately lead him to some knowledge of comparison. In this way, accumulation of the knowledge of comparison with the succeeding hundreds and thousands of events accumulating on top of each other causes the birth of a goodness, evil concept in him, in its simplest form, and by this, conscience starts to develop and becomes alive. Events that will occur as the result of all these acts are reflected to spirit and result in evolution. After that, new and more advanced needs emerge in the spirit. Spirit, in the face of these new needs, starts to expect more meaningful reactions from the communications its body will render with its environment in a wider field. And this new need of spirit, again, in a similar way to the previous one, is immediately reflected to the body and its response is received from the body, that is, the being serving the spirit, by influencing crude matter and bodies around it through its body, causes the necessary events to occur in the face of these new needs of the spirit. He does good, he does wrong, he steals, he murders a man, he makes a sacrifice, and he sees the response, the reactions of those around him. All of these become an event. And by reflecting each of these events to the spirit via the channel of comprehension, it ensures its evolution. By this means, the human being, who finally reaches the last developmental stage of the world, forsakes the world completely in order to move on to more advanced stages.
Yes, this is a passage summarizing those 500 or 700 lives a human being lived in the world school in 2 pages. What strikes my attention first in the first paragraph is that the evolution must progress communally, that is, without communal exchange of humans, the development of the beings is not possible. Obviously, as it happened in the olden times, retreating from life and humans to become a recluse in a mountaintop does not accelerate a human being's progress. On the contrary, it slows it down. We see this in the actual examples of children who spend long hours on the computers cannot socialize in the daily life, hence, they cannot build relationships with other people, they cannot exchange influences, they cannot connect, and this leads to many hardships. So, what should we do? We must mingle with the community, share with others, work with others. There are sayings like, human matures human. Or, we test you by others. For example, in the Quran, Surah Furqan, Ayat 20, we never sent any messenger before you, O Prophet, who did not eat food and go about in marketplaces. We have made some of you a trial for others. It seems that no matter which developmentary level we are in, this rule doesn't change. If we have a body in the hydrogen cosmos, then we must be in relationships with other people. Why? Because, from what we read and discussed so far in the book, we know that the influences matters receive and send around is in a ratio. Just like the example we read in this passage, influence is different when a man whips a rock than when a man whips a child. Because the influences coming from a living being is much more complex, much more intricate, and in a much higher level. Compared to this, the influences from a rock would not affect a man. For example, atrocities toward a tree or an animal may affect many people, but some people will be indifferent to such incidents. Yet, when atrocity toward a child is done, and when the activity of helplessness or innocence surface in the emotions and feelings of a person, she or he will be very affected by this incident. Therefore, as we interact with more intricate influences, our ability to exchange influences increases, our ability to put many pieces together increases, our power to compare, discern and harmonize all those influences increases. And this is only possible by our relationships with people in our daily life. And eventually, our ability to comprehend increases. As we read here, he makes a sacrifice, and he sees the response, the reactions of those around him. So, it is clear that by doing opposing deeds, the knowledge of comparison emerges. Action-reaction, cause and effect. The causality principle, and the knowledge of comparison that feeds them must emerge. And this can only be possible by the exchange of influences.
Well, our friends always ask or write us questions like there are so many atrocities in the world, children are raped, people torture animals, there are so many battles and wars. What kind of a harmony you talk about? Of course, when seen from a certain perspective, their reproaches are understandable. Yet, please try to understand what is meant by this striking example we just read in the book. When we hit a rock, we can't get a reaction or opposite component from it, other than that it is hard to crack, but in the sense of inner development, this doesn't make us gain experience or cultivation. But when we hit a child, reactions of the child, but especially the reactions from others around the child, give us many insights into our action. The book mentions two types of knowledge, that is, stem knowledge and branch knowledge. The stem knowledge is what we learn by the consequences of our own actions, and the branch knowledge is what we learn from others by observing the events they experience and their reactions to these events. This is how we gain experience and cultivation, the knowledge of comparison. And since the questions about atrocities, when we witness such an incident, and especially if we are involved in such an incident, the reactions we give can be automatic if we have no knowledge about the cause and effect relationships or the opposing components of a duality unit, or if we have more knowledge about our own self and ample observations about the reactions of others by widening our comprehension. The reactions we give may be semi-comprehending, more in tune with conscience. We can even compare our previous reactions to the events with our reactions we now give to same or similar events, and we can see if we gained knowledge of comparison or not. So, our being is in a relationship with our body, but also is in need to be relationship with the other beings' bodies and other objects. And this relationship is not limited with the bodily beings. Because there are influences coming from the beings in duty. We just read in this passage an interesting sentence. Therefore, bodily beings need to be in reciprocal interchange with other bodies and matter that exist outside of the body. And later in the book, we will read how this exchange of influences includes, besides the influences from beings in duty, also beings out of body, such as deceased beings that are in the spatium. And when we talk about influences, just consider astronomical ones, since all bodies have magnetic fields and send and receive influences, event the position of planets, sun flares etc. All of these affect our bodies and organs and hence, our subconscious matter, that is, our senses, perceptions, feelings, emotions. And all those ups and downs are for the value differentiations to occur between opposite components of each duality unit, from smallest to largest, and all of these are organized, calibrated and oriented by the organizational systems in duty. Why? So, events can happen. And as the book states, humans do good, humans do wrong, humans make sacrifices, and they see the response, the reactions of those around them. All of these become an event. In short, we humans display all innumerable degrees of choices between two opposites, that is, of the egoistical earthly cravings and of the more encompassing altruistic deeds, by gradually learning to make increasingly conscientious choices as we encounter events after events during all of our lifetimes. And what happens to all those experience and cultivation we managed to gain? Again, let me read from the Divine Order and the Universe, comprehensions pertaining to these event combinations, which are reflected from essence being to spirit, allow the evolution of being at this stage. Yes, that's all I can say for now.
You made a good summary, thank you. And I think, at this point, we can share the image I prepared. Here it is. Yes, here, we have an event. That is, in any day of our life, starting from the moment we wake up till we sleep again, within a period of 24 hours, we encounter innumerable events we notice or don't notice at all. Some of these events strike our consciousness, our emotions strongly. Some of these events seemingly don't touch us, but actually, we are exposed to all of their influences. Now, let's take one event. First, it strikes our five senses, or our sense organs, and of course, our nervous system. And please remember, everything works with the duality principle in our body. And when its influence lands on the field of that sense organ in our brain. And what happens? Our emotion and thought images emerge against this event. Then we call it experiencing this event, and new synaptic connections are made, learning happens, and the state that emerges is worldly comprehension. For example, the perception or comprehension when we look at this pencil, occurs through our eyes and via our nervous system, emerges in our brain, and the worldly perception about this pencil occurs. And this happens so fast, it is instantaneous. Then, it is conveyed to the consciousness center in our brain, and later, via our consciousness, it is conveyed to our being, and, via the superconsciousness part of our being, it is conveyed to our spirit. This process continuously occurs for each moment we live. And we can reverse the direction of the red arrows, as well, because the influences from the spirit arrive at the superconsciousness part of our being, and via consciousness, those influences are conveyed to our brain, and from the consciousness center in our brain, all those influences permeate to our whole body, and this is the state we call life or animation, the constant relation between the spirit, the being and the body. Also, there is another part of this continuous process that happens while we sleep. Our sleep cycle is very important for our well-being because what we call first comparison, that rough comparison process occurs while we sleep. We send the result of this rough comparison to our unconscious, via the channel of consciousness, and we store such results there. Throughout a lifetime, by going to sleep each time, we fill this storage field. What do we store there? We fill it with all emotions, thoughts, images and memories related to all events we live and experience. And when we die and the spatium phase begins, a reprocessing is to be done by comparing the all-stored essential knowledge in our being with those memories of the stored knowledge throughout our last lifetime. Our knowledge of comparison is prevalent in this phase, and our being gains a heightened cause and effect knowledge as a result of this process. And this leads to the widening of the being's comprehension, and hence, leads to the development of the being. And as we just mentioned, through the channel of comprehension, this new knowledge is reflected to the spirit, and this causes the evolution of the spirit, but of course we cannot know how this happens. And immediately, the new needs of the being is established, and if the being needs to build a new body, the being re-enters the cycle of those 500 to 700 lifetimes by building a new body.
You explained it so well. And, dear friends, please remember that all of these occur continuously and in an intertwined manner within an infinite flow. I am checking the questions coming from our friends. For example, when you say other bodies and matter that exist outside of the body, do you mean non-corporeal beings or solid, corporeal beings? Actually, we mean all of these. If you watch our previous videos, you will see that the meaning of this concept of being includes all versions we can imagine or cannot imagine. Still, let me give you some examples. When we meet someone, we influence each other via our magnetic fields. This other person is a being outside of our own body. Or we visit a place and we feel and experience differently. That place, as a matter system, again outside of our own body, influence us. Or, this virus which is visible to us but influence us, together with the whole world by affecting our bodily system. And, the most important example is the influences of the beings in duty, of the helping beings. But I think, when I mentioned this sentence, I meant the influences of the deceased that are not in the body anymore but still have some influence on us. In short, all of us, all beings, we are always within a multidirectional influence system. So, it is much beneficial if we consider the concept of the being in a wider context, not limited as corporeal or non-corporeal. Alright, I continue reading. We had mentioned that developments of matter and their ability to serve the evolutions of spirits are only possible with influences. Now, we need to dwell on influences as much as necessary and to give knowledge regarding them. In introducing the topic of influences, we will again mention spirit-matter relations. Spirit's need for evolution is a necessity, and matter's ability to respond this need is, again, a necessity. However, neither can spirits directly send anything to matter, nor they can receive something from it. If that was all, the raison d'être of the matter universe, which is the imperative of the purpose of evolution, would be no more. However, for evolution the realization of the relation of spirit, matter is imperative in accordance with sublime necessities. So, these necessities are rendered through the manifestations of the original principle, which directly governs and comprises both the spirits beyond universe and the universes, as material influences in the universe. The realization of necessities in matter means the execution of the functions of influences by the value differentiation mechanism. Therefore, it is necessary to give knowledge, to the appropriate degree, about the influences pertaining to these spirit-matter relations which are an enigma of the universe, which has not so far been solved in the world. Influences using the motion possibilities of universe substance in infinite numbers and forms, again, in accordance with the evolutionary needs of spirits, and bringing out all the manifestations of the matter universe, again, with the same purpose, by executing their functions meet the needs of the spirit realm. That is, every motion, every change and every development in matter which is necessary for the evolution of spirits is only provided by these influences. So, each motion, each movement, each change, each development in matter that is needed for the evolution of the spirits are done by the influences.
Here, in the first paragraph, with this sentence, we see again the distinction between development of matter and evolution of spirit. And at the start of the second paragraph, the book gives a very important key knowledge. I read, in introducing the topic of influences, we will again mention spirit-matter relations. Spirit's need for evolution is a necessity, and matter's ability to respond this need is, again, a necessity. And everything is hidden in these two sentences. I mean, entrance of the influences into our matter universe and their rendering formations in innumerable various ways, and then the reflection of all of these formations is the reason for everything. Because, in order to gain experience, spirits need the matter universe, and the matter must respond to this need, it is in its nature. And the knowledge regarding how these two will be in a relation is governed by the original principle which we cannot and never will understand. As we mentioned in our previous videos, influences belonging to the original influence enter through the unitary, and they bring out the necessities belonging to our universe by the original principle's forces, and these necessities, that is, whatever that needs to be and done, are branched out into the smallest particle. This process of branching out in our universe is called influences. So, whatever occurs in wherever and in whichever level or cosmos in the universe, can only occur by conveying these influences from one matter to another. And, in the fourth paragraph, we read influences using the motion possibilities of universe substance, and this is the duality principle and the value differentiation. If you watched our previous videos or read this book, you will remember that one of the main mechanisms of matter, of the universe substance, is the duality principle. And why did it emerge? Let's go back to the beginning of the book, the source of the knowledge. Within the influence coming from the original principle and landing on the amorphous matter, there were both evolutionary values belonging to the spirits and prime values belonging to the matter that need to respond immediately to the needs of the spirits. When this two-sided influence descended to the amorphous matter, it brought the first duality unit within the nucleus of initial matter. That is, the duality principle is a principle placed within the structure of matter by the original principle, and the duality principle works with the value differentiation. If you remember, in a duality unit there were two polarities in equilibrium, and if we influence or charge one of the polarities, the equilibrium becomes disrupted, but we know that everything in the universe always needs to be in equilibrium, so, immediately a flow occurs between polarities and what we call motion emerges. Therefore, for all those events, incidents etc. we just mentioned to be happened, there must be activity always. And what is needed for motion or activity? Value differentiation, that is a flow of influence from one polarity to another, and the duality principle. Yes, these are what strike my attention in this passage.
Yes, while living these events in life, we internalize their influences, and as you explained in the figure we shared, these influences evoke images in our brain. And our brain, within nanoseconds, compare this new image and influence with the all of previous images, conclusions and experience, as if asking, was I exposed or not to this or similar influence before? And after scanning all previous data, and if the influence is similar, our brain directs me to react in the same way I previously reacted. If I become aware that I am always reacting in the same way after many repeats of the same influence in my life, then I can begin to notice why and how I react in this same way, and by making changes regarding my attitude etc., then a knowledge of comparison begins at that point. Let's say, an influence came and you reacted to it by anger. After repeating this many times, this reaction becomes a repetitive, automatic reaction which is established in your magnetic field, or in your perispirit. Only when you understand the cause and effect chain behind this influence, and why this influence is coming you, then this understanding rearranges the images in your brain, and then you can become able to govern your next reaction, and because of this knowledge of comparison, a new value becomes added to your duality unit, and this leads to a new direction of flow between polarities. And this means that you changed or neutralized the influence, that is, the reaction you send out from your magnetic field. Then, this reaction is not automatic or habitual anymore. It is changed because you changed.
When you mentioned anger, I thought something to add. This state of anger, for every being, is a hard and long journey until we gain proper amount of knowledge of comparison about it. I mean, everyone who had to work with his or her anger issues knows it too well. Let's think of an aggressive father. He displays all kinds of anger in the house. He shouts at the wife and the children, and even beats them. So, imagine that this is a typical domestic violence case. A day comes and this man meets another man who is much more aggressive than him. Of course, the father reacts habitually and gets into a fight with this man but gets beaten badly. This stronger influence is a sign that he needs to get knowledge of comparison regarding his anger. That beating is just that. Later, the family members may react more openly to him. Again, this is another chance for gaining knowledge of comparison. Yet, if he is a very rough person, he may not be able to benefit from those reactions from others around him. He may not be able to become aware of the consequences of his reactions and actions. Then what happens? When he dies, in the isolated state of the spatium, he needs to examine and study closely all those memories of his last life as an aggressive and abusive father by comparing this with his previous essential knowledge in his being. By this reprocessing, this being begins to establish the causality principle regarding this anger.
Or, if he was exposed to the reactions of such aggression, or if he exposed others to his aggressive reactions, in the next bodily life, this being's life plan, by the assistance of the guiding beings, is outlined or peppered with the learning opportunities, this time, with the opposite experiences. And within 500 to 700 lifetimes, a human being may become able to learn the causality principle by these cycles of processing and reprocessing. This is such a magnificent organizational system that none of a being's needs and will is in conflict with another being's needs and will. Such a magnificent fine-tuning, always working, non-stop. Yes, I see a question from one of our friends in the chat box. Let me read. Are these lifetimes follow each other in a chronological order? Or is it possible to incarnate again centuries later? Now, we had mentioned in our previous videos about how time is perceived differently in the world and in the semi-subtle realm the being is in. So, time perceived in spatium is different, as well. And soon, we will read and discuss this topic, the comprehension of time in the divine order and the universe. Then you will understand better why our timeline or measurement like years or centuries is not meaningful for the period spent in the spatium. Alright, let's continue reading. About the original principle, which is the great truth higher than the spirits and universes and governing both, we cannot say much. For, this is outside all knowledge, and even of our intuitions. The original principle reflects with its force all the evolutionary needs of spirits for universe substances and reflects the reactions of the universe substances in the face of these needs back to spirits. This force put the universe substances, which brought into existence in the face of the needs of spirits, into service by innumerable vehicles and ways in universe. And this sublime force is manifested in the universe with influences which are in states of the subtlest substances. So, these influences carrying the sublime necessities permeate every point in the universe, from its whole to its smallest particle, and do their functions. Matter substance takes form, develops, assembles, disperses, goes through formations, deformations and transformations in accordance with these functions, and in this way, the whole and parts of universe are consigned and managed in accordance with the needs of spirits. This, as well, of course, is executed through various mechanisms, lower and higher, and with principles of duty within the universe. Yes, only a paragraph, but full of knowledge.
Yes, now we read the concept of force, which is mentioned in many points in the further pages of this book. Let me read one of these further mentions of the force. We start to trace the evolutionary progress in the universe, with the concept of a projector, which is a powerful symbol. The lights of this projector represent the force or the necessities of the original principle we have mentioned. The source of this light is not the original principle itself but the force of it, which is merely orientated to the universe. The tip of the light is in that force and its base is in the primary matter. In this light are inherent both the needs of the spirits and the possibilities that will manifest in matter in the face of these needs. And these needs and possibilities will be unified only within this light, and the evolution will be executed. There was a question, like, can we call the necessities as the commandments? Well, yes, everything that needs to be is contained within this word, necessity. And we read here that this original necessity is permeated into the whole universe, into each particle of the universe, and again, as we read here, the universe substance gets formed, gets developed, gets gathered and dispersed, goes trough formations, deformations, transformations, and all of these are executed by the plans of duty in various levels. Later we will read in the book two main components of these plans of duty, which are mechanism of destiny and mechanism of time. As this mechanism of destiny brings out the events which are necessary for the evolution of the spirits by always comparing these events to occur with the original necessities. Here, in this paragraph, there is also a mention of the subtlest substances. This sublime force is manifested in the universe with influences which are in states of the subtlest substances. That's all I can say for now.
As you said, this sublime force of the original principle manifest in our universe with influences in states of subtlest substances. So, we see that it is this force that initiated motion in that almost inert amorphous matter. Maybe we can intuit from this paragraph that it is the original principle that builds the whole system, that establishes its function, and that makes it as a necessity. All right. Now we will read the passage on the influences, which will give more details. This is a long passage, but we have time to read, so I continue reading. These influences, bridging the way between spirit and universe, appear in four groups. Two of these are original influences, directly arriving from outside the universe. That is, they are influences coming from the original principle. The other two are secondary influences that have ensued from modification of the original influences after going through various treatments within matter and beings. We can only understand the advancing parts of the powers coming from the original source as influence. The true disposition and states of the ones that remain outside the universe are unknown for the universe's inhabitants. Those at the first part of the original influences are the manifestations of powers reflecting the needs of spirits to the universe and their reactions in the universe to spirits again. These are influences that are coming indirectly, belonging to spirits. And those at the second part are the influences entering the universe from the original principle, for the formation, deformation and transformation of the crude matter, which are of necessity and imperative for individual and communal evolution in the universe. Influences arriving in the universe belonging to spirits and seen in the first part are, although arriving, again, from the original source, expressions apiece of the spirit's behaviors and needs. These powers, sent from the original principle to reflect the universe and spirits to each other, and by this, to ensure evolution, participate in certain structures and mechanisms of beings and bodies which are assigned to spirits. These influences, when entering the universe, arrive at the unity of beings and necessities at the uppermost evolutionary boundary of the universe that we call the unitary. And from there, as regulated, they head towards a body in the milieu they will reach. Because these influences are directly pertaining to evolution, that is, because they ensure the connection between spirits and beings, we also call them evolutionary values. As to the powers that arise from the original principle in order to render the evolutionary necessities of spirits and to put crude matter and universe constitutions into proper forms, they are, by also descending to the unitary from the outside of the universe, apportioned and distributed to the whole and parts of the universe as sublime influences, in order to prepare and enforce cosmoses, spheres, beings and matter in accordance with the necessities of individual and communal evolution, which we call prime influences or prime values. These ensure the bringing of matter, objects, spheres, systems, nebulae and cosmoses into existence in any matter milieu, by building a nucleus through gathering parts of that milieu around a point and attracting other parts around it and generating matter constitutions. Influences at the third degree are, unlike first basic influences, not directly arriving from outside of the universe in accordance with the necessities of the original principle, but influences which are transferred to the exterior of the body by the bodies, that is, by the beings that exist at certain stages in universe. Actually, these influences, having come as well from the original sources, are quite altered and have lost their basic value after being utilized by any body and reflected outside of the body, as low quality relative to its actual value. Here, this expression of low quality should not be underrated. 4. There is nothing like small and huge scale in any manifestations of the needs of the original principle. The meaning implied by this expression of low quality means the necessities of adjusting influences in accordance with the milieus and aims they will advance in. The sending of high influence into a simple matter combination is not appropriate, nor do weak influences benefit very complex matter combinations. All of these are adjusted by the technical mechanisms being carried out by necessities. It is easy to see examples of these influences in the third degree among the influences mankind have on each other. Influences in the fourth degree are the values that become crude quantitatively. These are crude influences, stored as completely altered after prime influences used in a matter combination and used in automatic activities, when necessary. For example, the execution of automatic activities within a material system or in a body is done by using these stored influences. The magnetic fields of matter, which we previously declared, are within the scope of these influences. Yes, in this passage, the book began categorizing prime and secondary influences.
Yes, as you said, we now see 4 main groups of influences. 2 of these are super-universe, they belong to the original principle, and they are reflected into our universe by original principle, so these are external, in that sense. This is the most important point in this passage. Because, the source of the third and fourth influences are internal, within the universe. The influences belonging to the original principle descend to the unitary, and these are branched out and permeated into various levels of the plan of duty to execute the necessary transformations, and by undergoing a modulation, they are named as secondary influences. And what strikes my attention in the first paragraph are these 2 sentences. We can only understand the advancing parts of the powers coming from the original source, as influence. The true disposition and states of the ones that remain outside the universe are unknown for the universe's inhabitants. So, the plan settles this once and for all. All right, we call everything in the universe as influence, but we don't have any ability to say a word about what it is outside of the universe. Or, in other words, we name the advancement of our spirits as evolution, but what this evolution means for the spirits, we have no idea. Let's study the first influence, the influence we call as the evolutionary values. We had mentioned a key knowledge, if you remember. Spirit's need for evolution is a necessity, and matter's ability to respond this need is, again, a necessity. Take the first necessity, spirit's need for evolution is a necessity. So, these initial influences exist to respond to this necessity. It is an imperative because this is the reason of the universe's existence. And this process of reflecting is executed by the influences in the first group, that is, by the evolutionary values. And what is the second necessity? Matter's ability to respond this need is, again, a necessity. And the influences in the second group enters the stage, the prime values. And these influences that are reflected into matter by these incoming evolutionary values, there must be an immediate correspondence in matter. And this correspondence is the influences that belonging the structure of matter, the influences prevalent in all matter, and they are called as the prime influences. As these prime influences immediately respond to these evolutionary values, the almost eternal journey of the spirits in the midst of the matter parts and particles begins. And we had read and discussed this stages spirits go through in our previous videos. Would you like to add anything before I continue with the third and fourth group of influences?
Please continue. At least, before we say goodbye for this evening, we may be able to go over these groups of influences as well.
All right, as to the third and fourth group of influences. Now, the nucleus of the first matter emerges. And which influences made this possible? Evolutionary values and prime values. Up until the state of being emerges, in the almost eternal process of the development of matter and in the evolution of spirits, only these two influences can intervene in the structure of the atom. So, until the spirits reach this stage of building a being, no other influences intervene the structure of atom. However, gathering of these atoms for making up various objects, systems, galaxies, spheres etc. is done by the assistance of the secondary influences. Again, please notice that these secondary influences are not able to intervene the structure of atoms. This can be done only by the evolutionary values and prime values. Once the being is built by gathering of these high-level energies that is in a disarrayed state around a perceptual point, the influences we call as the evolutionary values continue their presence, but the influences we call as prime values leave their place to the secondary influences. There is a reason for this. Because, before the being is built, the motion and movements that matter can provide could be provided only by the prime values, that is, the influences that contain the knowledge of the matter. However, when the being is built, all the needs of the spirit within the universe now appear in this energy and influence complex or ensemble we call as the being, and because of this, the being does not need these prime values anymore. So begins the being's tests and trials with the secondary influences. These secondary influences contain all influences in the universe, starting from the crudest level, such as the action-reaction exchange between bodies, to the subtlest level, such as the working mechanism of the influences in the plans of duty. And for all those processes to occur, we need another field of influence in the fourth group, and this is the magnetic fields that occurs after the prime values bring out the structure of matter. Yes, there must be such a field that all those magnetic fields can interact, exchange influences and render changes on each other by the duality principle and the value differentiation. Yes, I think this summary is enough for this evening.
Thank you, Tümerhan. So, good evening, everyone. See you next week.
Good evening, everyone.